Good afternoon. My name is Ashish. I am an MA candidate at OSE, and I am assisting Professor Vieta as a graduate assistant, and one of the projects that we are involved in is the Student Dwell TO project. So as you probably are aware that there was a project called Student Move TO, the survey ran in 2015 and they came out with their report last year. And it was a tremendous success. It was well received, and the presidents of the 4 universities, they have decided to come together again. So it's a collaborative effort between the 4 universities of Toronto, York, OCAD, Ryerson, and University of Toronto. They're getting together. So this year, the collaborative project is exploring the issues around student housing, the affordability issues, the availability issues, the issues around inclusion and exclusion. And given the nature of the rental markets in Toronto, I am 100% sure that we don't need to underline the fact that student housing is an issue for all the universities and for all the students who are attending these universities. In fact, yesterday during one of the meetings with Tristan, there was this interesting point that there was a time when housing or living expenditure was a very small component of the student experience, the amount of money that you have to spend for being a student at the university. But now it's not only matching the amount of money that you spend for studying, but in fact it is far greater than that. So student housing is an issue. So I had a plan, I had written down something, I wanted to present the project in a manner, but I think it might be it might be out of place because I have never associated with the cooperative movement ever. So I am probably the outsider in this one. But being an outsider, my voice is probably more important because you would want to know why the other half of humanity, which has not yet bought into the narrative of corporatism, has not done so. When we talk of apathy, when we talk of why people think that, they don't want to, or why, as you said, that it may be overwhelming. Why do you not care enough? Now that is something that maybe I can tell you more often, and believe it or not, when we began this project on student dwelling, it became clearer that the narratives of, the dominant narratives around issues of student housing somehow had done something very unique. It had taken the student out of student housing. See, if you talk of student housing, the student comes before the word housing, right? But if you run a literature review, which we did, we ran a very extensive literature review as a first part of the study, we saw that universities were talking about student housing, the governments are talking about student housing, the provincial governments were talking about student housing, the developers are talking about student housing, but nobody is bothered about the lived experience of the student. There are surveys that try to explore what students want. See, the marketing definition of the consumer being the most powerful element, right? But believe it or not, the consumer is not the most powerful element. All the surveys out there that are actually evaluating student experiences, they are just trying to extract the unique selling propositions which can be used in marketing communication. So that is just it. The education industry became education industry some time ago. And when you talk of education industry, we are the consumers, and consumers are treated in a specific way. We are the source of the revenue. See, there are 4 P's in marketing, and the only one P that brings money into companies is the price. And the dominant discussions around student housing seem to talk so much about affordability, seem to talk so much about numbers, that we are forgetting that there are many other social elements and exclusions that get swept under the carpet. So that is what this project is trying to do. So there are 3 fancy words that I would just like to throw at you. First is, the project is multi-perspective. We are trying to incorporate the perspective of the builder, the university, the students, the local communities, and we are trying to understand the issues of student housing, especially in cities like Toronto, from this multi-perspective view. So that is the first thing. Second is it is multidimensional. See, cost of student housing, which is the most spoken about issue, right? How expensive it is to be. That is only one dimension, right? And when you are trying to look at it from the experience of a student, you find there are so many other possible political dimensions, right? There can be exclusions based on race, there can be exclusions based on gender, there can be exclusions based on orientations. So these are all dimensions that we are trying to explore. So this is again going to be a multi-dimensional appreciation of the student housing issue. The third is we are trying to do it in a multidisciplinary manner. Now, we have a team that is composed of activists like Tristan. There are people from Daniel School of Architecture. So you have urban planners working with architects, working with activists, working with sociologists, working with adult education professionals, working with data scientists, visualizers. So not only are we trying to study the problems around student housing in a multi-perspective way, but we are trying to somehow compress and make these different perspectives come together. Believe me, it's not easy. The theoretical perspectives of different schools are so difficult to bring them together. In fact, the tensions and the frictions, that brings out such a chaos, and that chaos is the generative force for student worldview. Because now that is forcing, a sociologist's perspective is forcing a market researcher to look at student housing in a different manner. And a market researcher's perspective is looking at an architect, is forcing an architect to look at student housing in a different manner. So when we come together, we are bringing our own streams together, and that chaos is giving rise to possibly radical and innovative solutions which are required. And the most important thing is that we are not looking at student housing just in terms of numbers of beds. That's not it. We are looking at student housing as a proxy curriculum. See, this conference, this get-together is about cooperation. Now, we have to be very clear that if you go and talk to anybody, it is easier to convince people that competition is a greater reality in this world. A highly competitive market, wherever you go, whether you go to seek admission in a university and after that you are trying to compete for grades, whether you are trying to compete for funding, competition is a greater and a more easily visible reality. That is why everybody has bought into that narrative that you have to compete. The more easier reality is differentiate or die. That has given rise to a world where individualism is more important, where differentiation is more important, where I am being convinced by the system ever since I have stepped into a school that if you do not differentiate yourself from your friends, from others, you will not get that dollar. That is where it all begins. We wear stuff to differentiate ourselves. We eat, we talk, everything is differentiation. That is the narrative of marketing. Now that is where student housing comes in as a proxy curriculum. In classrooms, even if we try to teach cooperation, I am not saying that universities are answerable to what people think like or how they are supposed to develop human beings as a whole person or something like that. But the point is, real learning of cooperation comes when the lived experience of a student shows that yes, it is possible to cooperate and live. That is where cooperative housing, student cooperatives are very, very important. In fact, you could be the final frontier of the war against the individualized living. That could be it. And that is what we have found in our literature review already. We have already found that, and we are going to conduct focus groups to bring the students back into student housing. The focus groups will be run in the fall, and then we'll be running design studios. We'll be introducing all these elements into curriculums in all the 4 universities. And this probably, the student dual TO is most probably going to be something of a biannual or an annual kind of affair. We are even trying to collaborate with UTIL. You already saw their presentation. We are in discussions with them. And what we are trying to do in the end, I would like to end by saying is, for us, student housing, the way we are looking at student housing, it is more as a social element rather than just as an element of housing. We are not looking at student housing as merely housing. We are looking at student housing as a social platform, a social issue. And we want to bring the student back into student housing. So that is what Student Dwell TO is all about. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And so we're going to go into a little bit more of a Q&A session, more in this research aspect that the last couple presentations have been on. So I'll open up the floor again. If you can start with